something I did want to talk about that I don't know if I touched on, and I wanted to talk about when I was mentioning that visionary aspect comes in and sort of displaces or kicks out some of the ego elements, at least temporarily, is that the ego being displaced kicks out some of a person's functioning and ability, perhaps, and scrambles it. But what happens is that a person in the visionary state, they can actually acquire new abilities. So a person doesn't necessarily have a disability. They perhaps have different abilities. And so it would be interesting to find out what it is that these abilities are that people can all of a sudden manifest. Just like sometimes a person that has a stroke or some kind of brain thing happen, all of a sudden when they recover, they are a great poet, or they can write music when they've never learned music. And these things are pretty rare. But I feel that a person, after they've gone through a mental health crisis, perhaps sometimes now has a new pool of abilities to tap into. And people that when they're in the extreme part of their visionary state, they might feel like they're psychic, they might feel like they're a prophet, they might feel like they're magical. And maybe they are for that little time being. Maybe it's just a delusion, whatever. But how can some of those extreme traits actually get tamed down into something that is tangible on a daily basis? So maybe a person that felt like they were a prophet and they were writing a new spiritual doctrine while they were in that state, maybe that person actually did connect with some kind of spirituality that they want to explore, when perhaps before the crisis they were an atheist. Or maybe a person starts like writing incessantly, and then after the fact they can still write pretty well, and maybe they're not channeling the type of information they were before, but maybe all of a sudden they do have access to being able to write. Or I feel there's a lot of heart-centered qualities that come into play. So for example, when I was in mania, I felt very connected to the issue and occurrence of homelessness. And before that, I didn't have any real interest or thoughts about that. But when I was in that state, I could feel it, like I know, or I can sense, or I have a felt sense, or it's like it's within me that I can feel the empathy, the empathetic resonance with the person that's homeless. And I could really feel it, and it was extremely painful. So even though the manic state is very beautiful and wonderful and happy, I also experienced a lot of pain in that I was so open and I was so vulnerable, and I was so as if there was no ego of my own self to block me from resonating with whoever it was that I was perceiving at the moment. So if I was looking at a little child, I would be in just like glee and happiness and how wonderfully happy they are. Or if I saw a parent yelling at their child, I would just kind of be mad, like, you know, you don't need to do that. And then if I saw like a homeless person, I would feel incredible pain and sadness and freezing cold, and just, it's almost like since I was nothing as an ego, I was just wherever I was what that situation was, and I could feel it. And now imagine if we were like that all the time, if all of us could really sense what we were seeing. So if somebody looked at a homeless person, they felt what it was like to be homeless. They didn't feel yada 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 going on about what's for dinner, thinking about what happened at work and looking at it and walking by, which means not actually seeing anything at all. Not seeing. So this ego and monologue and yammering on actually is a protection mechanism, because it blocks whatever it is that's really there. Because whatever's going on in the yammer is not what's really there. It's just yammering. And it actually prevents action. So going back to when I'm manic and there's no real yammering and I'm really there with what's happening in the moment, I have to go help that homeless person. I have to go take him for coffee. I have to go give them $10, not just $1. It's instant action, because I can actually feel it. It's not just because I'm like, aw. It's like, ouch. Like, I feel your pain. Like, you can't be in this much pain, because now I feel it's like I'm in this much pain too. I'm right there with you. It's a very sensitive state. It's hypersensitivity. It's too much information, in that most people don't receive that amount of information. If everybody received that amount of information with everything they looked at, that would be a lot of information. But our thinking that we are separate egos, and our identification with our own inner personal monologue, actually is what blocks this sensitivity. And a certain amount of it, I'm sure, is necessary. It's really necessary, because we have to protect ourselves. Well, we don't have to, but what I'm saying is that by this calculation, if everybody entered that state of consciousness, which is called mania, where you really experience, for a lot of it, you really feel what you're seeing. You're not separate from it. If you see a tree, you're feeling that tree and you're like, wow, this, and especially looking at nature, it's the most beautiful thing ever. Nothing could be more beautiful. And human beings too. But then to see some of the unfortunate circumstances of human beings and feeling that, if everyone were to all of a sudden feel that, there would be a lot of action. But there'd also be a lot of confusion, because you don't know what is you anymore. Because once a person, once I was in that state for a long time, and I'd felt so many different situations, I didn't know what was me. There was no me. It was just whatever was in the moment. And I feel like if all of a sudden all of us could feel that at the same time, there'd be a lot of confusion. People would be like, what's me? Am I doing this? Who's doing this? Who's making me feel this way? And we're all doing it. And we've all done it by allowing it to come to be. We have all played our part in creating that. In creating a person being homeless and everyone walking by. That would be like somebody walking by somebody that's bleeding to death, which actually can happen in a crowd too, because everybody thinks, well, if something was wrong, somebody would do something. But I guess that's what happens with the people laying on the street too, is that oh, it can't be that bad. Everybody else is walking by. And, when I go into manic consciousness and I feel that, and then I can't walk by. And maybe there does need to be a certain amount of that slowly happening, where people start feeling like, I can't walk by, I can't not do anything. Maybe not all at once. But because everybody's so identified with their mind, they're not really looking at what's going on. Like, maybe people stop walking by trees being cut down, and realize if we don't have trees, we don't have roots, and then the soil blows away, and then we don't have soil, and then if we don't have trees, we don't have birds. We don't have birds, they're not going to eat the insects, and then why do we have insects? Like, it's so interconnected, and we don't see it. I even had this sense that when there's a lot of traffic on my street, I live on a busy street, the birds don't chirp to each other. And it's not that I can't hear them, they don't. And then when it's quieter, they're out and they're chirping to each other. So even that, all the noise, the birds can't communicate. So even if there were a few trees, if there's more roads and noise, they still can't do what they need to do. And it's really important to have birds, really important. So yeah, a certain amount of people not being able to walk by. And it's not even walking by, it's realizing that that person laying there is actually me too. Not me as in the ego, but as in that pain that that person's in is my pain too. And I feel like that's a lot of what is causing mental illness, is that, maybe society as a whole seems normal and the baseline of people is normal, but all that pain and that inequality that we ignore is happening in consciousness. So it might not be happening to you or me or somebody else that you know or we know, but it's happening to somebody, and it's happening in consciousness, and we all share that consciousness because it's all the same. Like, pain is pain, human suffering is human suffering, and we all suffer. And so if I'm not suffering and somebody else is, you can think of it as an additive effect in consciousness. And their suffering ignored is going to come out as some kind of something in somebody else. Not because of punishment, but because it's all human consciousness. It's got to go somewhere. If somebody's crying out and suffering and laying on the street and they're being ignored just because they're not able to articulate themselves, doesn't mean that it's not there. There's a human being there. It's a whole universe that's being ignored. So if that energy of some sort in consciousness creates mania, which is sort of people often, not always, I'm generalizing here, and I'm speaking from my own experience and things that I've heard, but I'm not saying this is all true. I'm just talking, really. That energy of that person suffering and crying out, laying there, you can almost think of it as like a negative disturbance in a way that creates like this positive disturbance in consciousness that creates almost a person being manifested to have that energy where their ego sort of disappears a bit and they're not able to walk by. So the one being walked by and suffering and calling for help inside, that energy could create that a consciousness responds, a person responds, maybe not exactly to that person laying there directly, that would be, maybe that happens eventually, but that person that goes into manic consciousness sort of acts like a little bit of a temporary saint sometimes. Sometimes it's not all saintly in mania. It's not all happy. People often get very angry and very agitated, and oftentimes it's because of injustice. And even if it ends up coming out as like, a person that is experiencing the mania, it sometimes comes out as they're mad and they're the angry one, and they're mad about something personal. Sometimes it happens that way, but a lot of times that's just built up over seeing so much injustice and feeling so much injustice for a period of time, and then eventually comes out as like F you, and blah, you're stopping me from, you know, running or something. I don't know what it is, but, and then the person's seen as very egocentric or grandiose, and the grandiosity is often a person feels like they can really help the world. At sometimes often it turns a little bit because it turns into like, I'm the one, you know, but really that translates as I'm the one and so are you, and we all are, and most people are not sensing that and feeling that at the same time as a person that's in that consciousness is. But again, perhaps the world needs a certain amount of people thinking they are in order to eventually have enough people that really feel like they want to change the world. So it's one thing to feel like I'm the one, but it's another thing to feel like so are you, and what can we do about all of this? So sometimes it usually does go too far because it's difficult to know where to stop it, and it doesn't really stop on its own. And it's actually not a pleasant feeling to feel like I'm the one or it's up to me. You know, that's the height of it, is I'm the one and it's up to me to help everybody. And the worst of it is, you know, I'm all alone. Like, I'm so alone and there's nothing I can do. So it's definitely a spectrum, and part of this, once that energy gets activated in somebody, a person often experiences that whole spectrum from, you know, feeling altruistic and empathetic in the moment because they're actually feeling the states of other people, you know. And it's not, you know, this isn't anything miraculous. It's just information. So like words are 7% of communication in general. It's more than that, but in general, you can pay attention to what somebody's saying. But then you can also pay attention to body language, and you can also pay attention to tone of voice, and a lot of different things in order to read situations. So to read a situation, I could close my eyes and just listen to words and tone of voice and get the message. Or in the manic state, I feel like a person's perception changes from verbal only to seeing things completely holistically, and sort of, so basically, to see a person laying on the street, maybe with like urine stains and, you know, disheveled, if you were to, like, you can say, oh, poor homeless person, in your head, and that's like those are some words. Or you could really look and like take that whole impression, and then like so much so that your consciousness goes into that person, goes, you know, maybe it's like a holographic process. You can like read that and holographically put yourself in that place, and then when you're in that place, you feel it. So that's the other extreme of just reading, listening to words of people, what people are saying. We can get impressions all the time. And so this state is like extreme impression, to the point where I can actually feel like I am a homeless person on the street. Not just even looking at one, but I've had experiences a couple of times where I actually lose my identity in my own mind, and I feel like a homeless person. And I don't feel like, oh, I'm a homeless person. I feel terrified. I feel freezing cold. I feel scared. I feel lost. I feel confused. I feel, you know, I feel so many things. And that might go back to when I was talking about that man that I took for coffee, that I am him, he is me, in a way. And we all are each other. You know, really, we share, supposedly, We share the entire cosmos, the entire universe. We share that. The only part we don't share is our own body. So when we think about how we have this whole visual field and this whole feeling and this whole information of what we're seeing and hearing and perceiving and everything, we share all of this, except for this tiny little speck that's our body. And even that is temporary. Our bodies are temporary, but the rest is here longer. And that here longer part is the part we all share together too. So really, we are as much each other, and more so than not, you know, because we have these tiny bodies, and we relate through these tiny bodies, but really we're relating about the rest of it, which is all of us together, which is the world. So we're so concerned about our own personal body and reality, but really the one we share, you know, and that's the one that we truly are, and yet we don't perceive that. But when manic consciousness comes along, it's sort of like, holy crap, like I'm this, like I look at the tree, I'm beautiful, this is beauty. And then the homeless person, like, oh my God, like how can something like this exist in a universe that's so beautiful? And that's part of the trouble too, is in that manic consciousness, feeling such empathy from the level of perceiving the beauty of a tree, and then coming across somebody laying on the street, you know, a beautifully complex structure and being of a tree, and then there's one that's a human being that's even more complex and more beautiful, laying on the street. You know, I guess it's no wonder that we allow that for human beings when we'll chop down a tree and not even think about it, or not even think about other resources that could be used, or treating trees as a resource. It's not a resource. Just because it's there doesn't mean chop it down. We chop down trees and we chop down human beings. We let them lay there. So the super beautiful structure of a human being is just wasted. If anything, humans are our greatest resource. So in manic consciousness, to see the beauty of a tree and then be at that level of beauty and wonder, and then see a human being laying on the street is like the ultimate roller coaster in consciousness. To have the conscious experience of the beauty of a tree, and then have the conscious experience of the unbelievableness of a person laying there like garbage, is difficult. It's like, that is mania. That is the fall from mania to psychosis. It's like, wow, the beauty of a tree, and then oh, the awfulness of trees being cut down, to oh, like a human being laying on the street. It's like it's hard to stay in that state of wonderment and beauty, because not everything is that. And I feel like part of the trouble is too, is that we don't know how to help, or we don't know what to do. So there's nothing a person can really do about a tree being cut down in that moment. And there's only so much a person can do for the homeless person laying on the street, unless the person in manic consciousness is like, hey, come home and have a shower. And yeah, and you know, the homeless person probably experiences that as like a miracle, as an angel or something. So I don't know what I was talking about again, but so yeah, I can remember I was talking about the example of if everybody all of a sudden had that sort of sensitivity to other people and what they're experiencing, it would be very confusing. It would feel like all of a sudden, basically it would feel like psychosis. It would feel like everybody would be in psychosis at the same time, and there would be absolute chaos because nobody would know who did what and who was thinking what and what thought came from where, and that's going on all the time. Yet some of us are able to block it with our egos and our thought structure. But it doesn't mean it's not there, and it doesn't mean that it's not affecting people in other ways. One of the things that I fundamentally came to when I was in that state was that we are killing each other with our thoughts, feelings, and actions. So if you think about consciousness, and we all share it, that inner subjective realm of visions and thoughts and words is collective to all of us, and they collectively have an effect, and they produce results. And so a bunch of bad thoughts over here causes one psychosis over there, for example. You know, why are so many people hearing voices that aren't their own? It's all one consciousness, and we can all hear and sense and feel things, and only to a certain extent. If we could feel them more, we would maybe act on things more, and if we could feel them way too much, we would be in pain from other people. We probably already are, we just don't really feel it. And you know, if we could feel it even more, we wouldn't know what is our own pain and what is anybody else's pain. We'd have no idea. We would just be like looking around. We'd have to like plug our ears and close our eyes because we wouldn't be able to manage it. It would be so loud. And I'm wondering if this is why a lot of kids are being born autistic, is because they need to drown that out. They end up staying in their internal subjective reality because, you know, maybe the collective unconscious is too loud for them, and they're like, ooh, I'm gonna stay in here, and then I'm gonna stay internally, and I won't necessarily learn language because that's the thoughts that are the words that end up harming people. Like thoughts as language and words. Like there's so much about thought disorders. Maybe all thought is disorder. And this isn't a new idea. This is an insight of J. Krishnamurti. He says thought is disorder, not there's a thought disorder. And basically, in my experience in psychosis, there's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of associations and images, and these all come from thoughts, which are just words, which are language. So it's like words and language drive me bonkers. So what is sane language? Is there such a thing? You know, what words are good and what are not, or does it matter? But basically, I've realized that words are sounds, and sounds come from silence. So what is more fundamental than sound and words is the silence. And luckily, my brain is pretty silent most of the time. But when I go into a state of psychosis, it's very noisy, and there's thoughts and associations and terrible thoughts and terrible images and awful feelings and scary experiences that happen inside of me. And sometimes I feel like those are being processed for other people, or like a certain amount of the disordered thought, goes through a certain number of people. Like, it's got to go somewhere, I guess, for processing. I feel like a processing plant for brain sewage. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it does go along with the we all share the same consciousness model of things. And I don't know if that's true. It's also something that J. Krishnamurti says, that we all share the same consciousness. And really, this is a crisis in consciousness. It's about the consciousness. It's not about the individual person. And I don't know. These are just some thoughts and ideas. This is just about inviting conversation that's different. And there are a lot of people out there, amazing people, that are having conversation about this. And this is just me having conversation about this too, because I feel like there's always room for more people having conversation about consciousness, about mental health and what that means, and different possibilities of what that means. And maybe it means a lot more than we think. And part of me feels like it's actually all very meaningless, in that none of these thoughts and everything that I'm talking about is like, it's not the actual thing. So me talking about my experience of feeling like I'm a homeless person, or taking a homeless person to coffee, isn't me taking the homeless person to coffee. I could be out doing that right now, but instead I'm just talking about it. So that's what I mean. The talking about it is meaningless. The real thing is maybe perhaps being able to see more clearly that it's taking action on these things that one sees on a daily basis. That's really important. And perhaps in my own case, these are things that I'm experimenting with. Not experimenting with, but moving towards embodying. I would like to move towards embodying my mania, meaning how I was in mania, I would like to be like that on a daily basis. Not by being manic, but just by being a human being. So that energy it enabled me to be more of a human being and actually care more and feel more. I felt way more. But now, knowing that, maybe I don't have to feel that same amount of pain and empathy to just go and sort of be that way anyway. Like, do I need to be rewarded and punished by feeling? Do I need to be rewarded with beauty and punished by the pain of another human being laying there to motivate me to actually still be able to see that without the pain? So that's what I mean by embodying my mania, is that I can look at harvesting some of the ways that I was and think, well, what ways might I want to incorporate into my life? So a lot of people do that. They do goal setting, personal growth, try to cultivate new skills, try to find their values. Well, I feel like my experience of mania and psychosis can actually be a very good source of information for a lot of that stuff. So it's almost like personal growth for bipolar or mania or psychosis. I feel like it is a growth experience. And even though, like I talked about, it definitely disables and scrambles a lot of the elements of me as a person, as an ego, it also gives me a lot of information about perhaps why I was scrambled in that way and what I can incorporate into myself differently. So that's what I also mean by different abilities. I had a lot of really great abilities when I was in mania, and not all of them, they didn't all stay. Once that energy went away and subsided, it no longer augmented those qualities that the extra energy was able to augment. And I went through psychosis, and then I was medicated and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't mean that I can't think about what I experienced internally and some of the meaning, and harvest those things and imagine how, and start integrating it into my daily life. So if I lost, say, imagine I lost 50% of my ego capacity ability, and all of a sudden now I have a disability because I don't have the energy or motivation or drive or cognitive ability or functioning to just insert myself back into 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. But perhaps by looking at some of those qualities that I had, I can find ways to have those in daily life. So if I was more resourceful, if I was more confident, if I was more creative, even just making these videos, I really don't know what I'm gonna do with them at this point, but I'm just talking to myself mainly. But even this can be thought of as a way to, be a little bit more courageous, be more open, communicate more, reach out to strangers, even though it's not in person, and be visionary, and be insightful, and be passionate. This is just a way to do that and embody that. And so for me, I feel like in the state of mania, there were all those traits, and I can translate that into daily life. Even though I'm not in that state of mania, I can embody it in that I am working on those traits, kind of like personal growth in a way. And it's not even personal growth, it's just, it's capacities that I saw that I have. They're within me, they're there. And I was gifted the experience of being able to embody that in a pragmatic way in daily life. In mania, it didn't last, but I'm not surprised it didn't last. That's not me. That's not the practiced version of me. That's not the me that is so coalesced in my brain cells and my neural networks. Though I do feel that some neural networks through that process were dissolved, which would equate to some ego structures, and then some were seeded. So some were neuroplastically changed, and the potential for me to be more like that way I was in mania is there, because I was that way. That wasn't just a symptom of a disease. I was actually that way. And I feel like it left traces in my brain, in my neurology, and it left little seeds of neural networks. But since that's not how I am in daily life, I was that way for, say, a month. So it's in my brain, but it's not how I have been for the last 34 years. But by at least having that taste, I can see, wow, I was that way. So these are the traits that I could work towards practicing more, embodying in daily life, so they're actually integrated into my neural networks. And if they're integrated in my neural networks, then perhaps I'm just that way at that point, and I don't actually have to go into the state of mania in order to be that. And from an evolutionary perspective, perhaps evolution wants me to be that way, or wants those traits to happen in humanity. And we all assume that we are our egos and that we have to slowly over time become something. Well, mania proves otherwise. And even though it didn't stay forever, doesn't mean it doesn't give me a hint. It's, a lot of us think about our dreams and our goals and our traits and how we want to be and our values, and we put them on a vision board, and then we try and visualize how things would be and how would it feel to be that way, and if I was that way and if I had those things. Well, mania is actually a reverse vision board experience. It's like being exactly how one wants to be, feeling exactly how one wants to feel. It's a very beautiful experience, a lot of it. And it's like actually experiencing it for real. It's like, imagine your best vision board that you could create. And now imagine actually being the person you need to be to bring that vision about. Maybe not having all those things exactly, but actually when you are that person that you exactly want to be, you don't even need those things. You don't. You won't even care if you have them or not. You may get them, you may not, and you won't care, because that state of being exactly how you want to be, exactly how you're meant to be, exactly how you are, underneath all this conditioning and programming that we've been given, then it's the best feeling ever, and you don't need anything. You only need yourself exactly as you are. And so it's like that. It's like being the best version of yourself that you would imagine yourself as. Maybe even just even if you had everything you wanted and you were feeling amazing, that's how mania feels. And you are everything you wanted to be. And in that way, I feel like a person that's experienced that can potentially create a really good vision board, because it's actually congruent with what one wants inside, because a lot of that comes out in mania. And so in that way too, a manic experience is like a vision casting experience, in that you become the vision of yourself that you would envision you want to be. It's not even a version of yourself that you even know you can be. And then all of a sudden you're that, and you're like, wow, I can be this? And now the thing is that it doesn't last. And I don't think it's meant to for most people, because it's kind of like showing one's potential or showing how one is, but most of the time it still has to become an embodied thing, like embodied in daily life and daily experience. So I guess the more one can be like that version of oneself in daily life, it will become practiced in the brain. Like the brain will actually change from habitual structures to these ways of being that, maybe these ways of being aren't habits of structure. Maybe they're just as those other habits of structure dissolve. So maybe part of the way to become one's manic self, and I don't mean manic as in feeling the pleasure of that, I mean as in embodying that person. I don't think striving towards that feeling is the goal. The feeling is a byproduct that may or may not happen if a person works towards that. The feeling, I could take something later tonight that would make me feel pretty great, but it's just a chemical. It's not going to change my brain cells forever and make me that way forever. It's not going to make me stay that way forever. Once the chemical wears off, it's gone. So once the mania wears off, whatever that process is, however it's initiated, it's gone. And but it still has a lot to say, and it has a lot to show, and I can work towards embodying some of those qualities. And when I do that on a daily basis, then it is in the neurology, whether it's by dissolving the habitual brain cells or by creating new neural networks. You know, it's about being more sensitive, being more perceptive. It's about seeing. And seeing happens more when thinking isn't happening, because thinking blocks seeing, because it's telling you what it's seeing, which is something that is old from the past. Thoughts are always from the past. They're not actually anything to do with the present moment. So, so actually seeing and, you know, interacting with living things is big. And these are things that I'm curious about myself, and moving towards that. I'm wondering if by moving towards my manic self, there will be no need for the state of mania, because a state is temporary. And if I can earn it as a stage, like a stage of my life, like I'm there, then as who I am on a daily basis, then it will be who I am, instead of just who I was when all this extra energy came into my life.